I don't know. It looks a little malnourished. Kind of a weedy looking git. Ah, there we go. That's better. Now we're talking. Wah! Welcome back to the Red Ones Go Fast. I am indeed Old Big Mech. And yes, today we do have some pointy-eared gits. But I'll explain. Yes, welcome back everybody to the Red Ones Go Fast. I am indeed Old Big Mech, and today we do have kind of a different video than one that we have done in the past, but also kind of the same. So for those of you that have been around the channel for a little bit know that I love saving me some teeth on some 40k, specifically with used minis. I am all about used minis, buying stuff, converting it, building up an army on the cheap, personalizing stuff like that. Now, I've done a couple of different videos on the 5 best armies for 40k. And when I say best, I don't mean like best in the meta. I'm not a competitive player in that way. It doesn't that's just not what I'm here for, right? I am an orc through and through. I play 40k because it's fun, because it's an escape from reality, because it's, a really awesome, immersive universe to screw around in, which is why I like the orcs, because they're just happy to fight. They don't really care whether they win or lose. So when I say best armies, I'm talking about that. Like, what are you going to have the most fun with? Now, I've talked about the 5 best new armies, and I've talked about the 5 best used armies. But I have had some really good conversations with, some of the commenters and posters and followers here on the channel that have gone, so I'm not really into any of those armies. Are there any that I should avoid? And that was a fantastic question. And again, because 40k it's supposed to be fun, right? And if orcs aren't your bag, I don't know why you're watching the channel, but if orcs aren't your bag, that's totally fine. You want to do pointy-eared gits, then you should do pointy-eared gits, because you will have way more fun painting and playing with the thing that you like than playing with the thing that you don't like. Now, that being said, this is going to be my 5 armies. I don't want to say to avoid, but these are the 5 hardest armies to collect used. Following? We'll get into it. All right, so when I'm talking about hardest, it could be a number of reasons. Hard to get, expensive, not very many models made, you really got to collect 1 million of them, stuff like that, right? They all have their own reasonings. And they can be overcome, usually with patience, money, both. But, just know that if this is the army you've got your mind set on, you might want to buy new, or just kind of make sure you're strapped in for a little bit of a rough ride. Now, I'm going to do this in reverse order, so I'm going to start with, the best, worst, least. You'll figure it out. Anyways, first I have an honorable mention, and that is the good old Leagues of Votann. Space Dwarves, squats to the old graybeards like me. Basically, this should be obvious, right? It is the newest faction in Warhammer 40k, obviously not including the original squats, but it's only been out for a little over a year. There hasn't been very many kits made for it, and ergo, there's just not a lot out there. Now, that being said, when they came out, they were very much the top of competitive meta, and right now in 10th, they're at the bottom of competitive meta. So if you do want to buy a Leagues of Votann army, now's actually a pretty good time to find a bunch of those weeded guibos selling off whole armies for pretty cheap as they go chase the latest, greatest, bestest, whatever. So you got a chance there. But outside of that, dips in meta playing, Leagues of Votann are a little hard to get just because they're so new. That will change with time. As they come out with more units, as they get put into big boxes, launch boxes, things like that, those cool 2v2 versus boxes, they're going to become easier to find. So this isn't going to stay forever, but, right now in the moment, outside of those armies, League of Votann is a little hard to come by. But let's get into it. All right, number 5 is Space Marines. I know. If you've seen my video, and if you haven't, click the link below or on the pinned comment. I'll have that specific video linked. I said Space Marines were the second best army to collect used, so why the heck are they saying they're one of the worst? Now, not generic Space Marines, okay? If you decide 40k is your jam, you want to get into it, and you're like, man, I'm going to pay me some Blood Angels, like I've been doing with these Firstborn guys. it could be hard because they've got specific units, and those units tend to not go up for sale. So for example, like with the Blood Angels, you have Death Company, right? Death Companies are the ones that completely lost their marbles and got a little gorkish, and you know what I mean? But most players don't sell their Death Company stuff. So what you end up with is a whole lot of generic Marines and not a whole lot of the actual Blood Angel stuff. Sanguinary Guard, Dante, Mephiston, things like that. And that's true of all the different Space Marine chapters. So, you know, even if you wanted to get into the Smurfs, right? Ultramarines. Find a Marnius Calgar, find a Rabute Gilliman, find a Victrix Honor Guard, right? Tyrannic War Veterans. Those are harder to come by. They're more expensive because they're cooler models. And basically, the more off the beaten path the particular chapter you're going for is, the harder it's going to be to find stuff. Ravenwing, Dark Angel stuff, not too bad, thanks to being in the launch boxes for a couple of editions. But you know, as their kits go out of print, and as Firstborns die, and as things like Scout Bikers disappear into the ether, that's gonna get harder. And then you get like crazier and crazier and crazier, right? Raven Guard, good luck finding any Raven Guard stuff. Iron Hands, White Scars. Then you get the successor chapters, right? Like, oh, I'm going to be Flesh Tearers. How much used Flesh Tearer stuff do you really think is out there, right? So that's kind of where you get into trouble. So that's why I'm a big proponent of, like, make up your own chapter, do your own thing, and then you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But if that's what floats your boat, if you're like, man, I love the idea of Deathwing and Ravenwing and the Dark Angels, that's cool, go for it. Just know that it's gonna be a lot harder to come up with those specific units. Now, the one caveat I will put on that is if you are buying some new stuff, or at least stuff that, you know, isn't necessarily fully assembled or painted or whatever, the really nice thing is that G-Dub has made some chapter upgrade kits. Specifically, you could get them for the Black Templar, the Blood Angels, the Dark Angels, and a couple other ones, basically. But you can buy those upgrade kits, and they give you, you know, shoulder pads and relics and cool things. And you can dress up, you know, the regular guys to look like what you need for not too much more money. So, you know, there's something to be said for that. But just know that if you are going for a specific chapter of Space Marines, it might be a little tough. All right, moving on. Number 4 on the kind of hardest armies to buy and build used is Dark Eldar. History lesson time. All right, you get sit down. Old Big Mac here was around when 3rd edition was launched. In fact, here is my 3rd edition launch box with the Special Space Marine Captain. Now, you'll see here that 3rd edition came with these lovely Dark Eldar warriors inside of them. In fact, they were half the army in the box. I played Dark Eldar quite extensively, built a pretty darn good size army of them, and then 6th edition was announced, and it was announced that Dark Eldar would be no more. Literally, they were going to be gone from the universe entirely, not even in the lore. They were dropping the entire range. They got squatted. Now, the reason for that squatting, we found out a couple of years later, is because they were redoing them as Drukhari. The Drukhari are cool, I will admit. In fact, they're way cooler looking than the old Dark Eldar ones, which are always a little kind of funky. What that means is you've got a whole rash of used minis, especially the warriors that come in this godforsaken box for super duper cheap, that share like almost no aesthetics with modern Drukhari. So if you're gonna collect a classic range, you can do it, but then, you know, again, your cool stuff like Incubi and whatnot can be a little pricey. Have you priced out an Absurdal Vect lately? Yeah, that's what I thought. And if you're going to do a Drukhari, because they're a newer faction and they've only been around for a few editions, it's a little harder to come by. So it's just, they're in a really weird spot where you have this huge chunk of time where they were one army, and then now a huge, well, not, you know, starting to get a chunk of time where they're a newer army, and the two don't really mix. Kind of like Firstborn and, you know, them their new Space Marine guys. But even worse, because at least with that, you know, as we now know, Terminators are Terminators are Terminators, right? And there's a lot of other units that are going to go back and forth. You know, the new Scouts aren't Primaris Scouts, they're just Scouts. So the Firstborn and the Primaris stuff are intermingle a lot more than Dark Eldar and Drukhari. So just be forewarned. If you buy Dark Eldar stuff, it might not necessarily work for your Drukhari. And if you're doing Drukhari, you might not necessarily, you know what I mean. Okay, moving on. Number 3 is Grey Knights and Deathwatch and Demon Hunters and Inquisitors. Again, history lesson. Way back when, in 3rd edition and going into 4th edition, Games Workshop started coming out with other agents of the Imperium. It started with the Codex Assassins, where you got your Vindicare, Calyxus, Calidus, and Eversword Assassins, right? And then they released Codex Demon Hunters. And Codex Demon Hunters was awesome, because all of a sudden there were these Inquisitors, the guys from the books, on the tabletop, right? And they would play with Imperial Guard and all sorts of other crazy units. And then they released Grey Knights, and Grey Knights were the coolest thing when they came out. And then you had, Deathwatch, right? And all sorts of cool stuff. Now, all those factions still exist. Some of them have split apart on their own. Grey Knights are now their own standalone army. You don't play them as, an add-on to a Space Marine force or as an ally. They are their own thing. Same with Custodes. Deathwatch has become its own army. Originally, it was kind of like a squad that you could put in your Space Marine army, and now, they're their whole own thing. Same thing with Demon Hunters. Demon Hunters, man, that codex was wild. You had Imperial Guard stuff in there, and Space Marines, and Inquisitors, and, they were hunting demons. And now they're, not even a thing. So a lot of that older stuff doesn't really translate. And frankly, especially the really early stuff, can be tiny. Now, I know this is a 2nd edition Imperial Guard Commissar, but this is one of the units that was actually, in those codexes as going along with the Inquisitor and the Retinue and stuff. And they are, well, frankly, tiny compared to the newer things. That is a standard guardsman absolutely towering over poor little Commissar here. So just know that there's a lot of really cool old stuff that you can, buy and put into your armies. But it's not necessarily going to translate into 2023, but also they're all standalone armies now. So you can't really have that big hodgepodge thing. If you're going to do Grey Knights, you can only hunt down Grey Knights. And Grey Knights, they have some older sculpts that are still out there. They're still in resin. They're still being made in the old molds that made the metal ones and stuff like that, right? They are not fully updated. Again, same with Custodes, same with Deathwatch, all that stuff. So just keep that in mind, that if you're like, man, I really like the idea of Deathwatch, that's the Space Marines I'm going to do, or I really like Grey Knights, I'm going to do a Grey Knight army. Just know that used, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. You need to be okay with metal minis, you need to be okay with smaller stuff, like scale differences in your armies, or you're going to need to be really, really patient. Alright, moving on. Because now we're getting into the ending here with the top 2. Number 2 is one of your gets. Eldar, specifically Craftworld Eldar. So again, history lesson. In 2nd edition, all the Eldar were kind of combined. You had Eldar and Harlequins, and Dark Eldar didn't exist yet, and things like that. In 3rd edition, they came out with, of course, the Dark Eldar that we just talked about, and then there was a regular Eldar Codex. Then they came out with Craftworlds Eldar and Harlequins. And Harlequins became their own standalone army, and Craftworlds became their own standalone army. And Craftworlds were Bieltan, Samehan, Eandon, Aeliotak, those different things, kind of like the Eldar version of Space Marine chapters, right? They each had their own color scheme, they each had their own specialty, and they were really, 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 really ridiculously cool. The problem being, most of the units that you bought in those heady times when there were 2 O's in the years, they're the same units you buy now. So, Striking Scorpions, Warp Spiders, Swooping Hawks, the unit you bought in 2002 is still the unit you're buying 21 years later. That unit can now drink. So that means that used prices are kind of high, because you can just go, I don't know. They're a thing. It means that used stuff can be high because it's still the new stuff. it's not priced like a 20-year-old Imperial Guard model. It's priced like a 2-year-old Eldar model. It also means that there's a lot of things out there that don't translate anymore because they keep screwing with what Eldar are, or Eldari. They came out with this whole Ynnari thing, right? And that fizzled. And now they've got these piratical guys that are like in kill teams. I think that's going to fizzle out. And so there's like all these different competing aesthetics, right? And there was a time where you could, well, I guess the time is now, that you can kind of mix some Ynnari and Eldari, or Ynnari and Drukhari, or Drukhari and Eldari, and like, I don't know what they're doing with that. And so since we don't know what they're doing with it, and the armies are all kind of weird and in weird spots, and there's a lot of really old stuff out there, and frankly, the really old stuff and the new stuff, boy, do they look different on the tabletop. Way worse than Firstborn Marines versus Primaris, or even Dark Eldar versus Eldar, man. You put an old school Guardian that's got the pose with the little launchers for the missile launcher next to these wicked new Rangers, man, it really looks like your army spans 30 years. Because it does. The problem is, you know, some of that stuff, like I said, you buy it new and it's still the 20-plus-year-old sculpt. Now, some things do stand the test of time. Falcon Grav Tank, you are the coolest model ever made. May you stay in production forever. Just black out the window. The driver's the only thing that's dated in that model. At all, right? We all agree on that. That's 100%. But the rest of the range, man, it could be really, really, really weird. And then, like I said, you're got the chance of ending up with some stuff that you maybe can't use as they keep moving units around. And, like, you know, we still don't know what's going on with Harlequins. We still don't know what's going on with Ynnari. Yeah. Be careful. Tread lightly if you're going to play with pointy-eared gits. Also, nobody really is going to want to play with you right now because apparently they're winning everything. I don't know, because I think I have 5 painted Eldar over the course of 30 years, so clearly I don't play them. But anyways, take care. All right. That brings us to our number 1, the absolute hardest army, bar none, to collect used for Warhammer 40k. And there's an asterisk. The answer is Imperial Guard. The asterisk is anything that's not Cadian. All right? Pretty clear. Cadians are the poster boys for Imperial Guard, right? They were forever. And then we had Cadia Falls, and we thought, like, hey, yay, right? They're getting rid of Cadia. We've got these wonderful, awesome new Death Corps Krieg guys. When they reboot Imperial Guard, like, great coats are coming back. We're getting all the old regiments. No, what did they give us? They gave us Cadians with knee pads. Super lame. That means if you want to collect an Imperial Guard army and you don't like that aesthetic, you are screwed. Now, you can buy 20-year-old Catachan sculpt still, but all they make is literally the Catachan squad. I think maybe you can get the command squad still too, and that's it. That's it, right? Your Sentinels, if you want the driver to be Catachan in the open top, you're converting that. Your heavy weapons batteries, the new ones, the big ones, you know, that you only get 2 of in the unit. You want the gunners? Nah, they're Cadians. you want a Castellan? Heck, it even says it in the rulebook. He's only a Cadian Castellan. Man, what is that garbage? We like this stuff. Give us this stuff. Now, I know this from experience because I am a huge Imperial Guard guy, especially classic regiments. Now, this right here is Armageddon Steel Legion. Again, old mech boy here. When I was a young mech boy, 3rd edition, Codex Armageddon, that whole storyline, these guys were awesome. The Armageddon Steel Legion was one of the coolest things Games Workshop ever did. And having Orcs and Black Templar and Steel Legion and having them all on the board at the same time were like some of the most iconic, best games ever. Now, they did recently re-release the Steel Legion in metal, but boy, did they charge a lot of money for it. It was like, you could buy a Stampa, or you could get a squad. Right? And those are the lucky ones. Let's talk about the unlucky ones. Mordian Iron Guard. You can't even make Mordians right now. Where are you going to get the hats? And they don't wear knee pad. You going to see a knee pad on their crisp trousers? Heck no, you're not. Mordians are out. Hell, even Death Corps of Krieg, the kind of replacements for Steel Legion, outside of the Kill Team squad, which, let's face it, is really expensive, you got to get Forge World stuff to get any kind of something cool for them. And even then, they don't make all the stuff. If you want a tank commander, that is Death Corps of Krieg. If you want a Commissar, if you want a Castellan, if you want a command squad, they don't exist. Now, all that stuff obviously has been made in the past for all the regiments. The classic regiments, right? You had Catachans, Space Vietnam guys. You had your Tolerant Desert Raiders. You had your Mordian Iron Guard. You had your Vostroyan Firstborns. And of course, my love, Valhallans. Now, I have a little bit of Valhallans. They've been with me for quite a while. And I want to continue having Valhallans. They are really expensive. In fact, this little squad here is probably worth as much as the Cadia Stan's army box. And that's not a joke. And those, frankly, are the cheap guys. Then you get into heavy weapons teams. They can get really pricey. Commissars? Even pricier. You want the big dog himself? I think Commander Chekhov or something like that was his name? Even pricier. You want to get really pricey. How about a tank rider? Right? You want to dress up your tanks and have Valhallans on them? You better be prepared to spend all your teeth. So what does that mean? Basically, if you're like, hey, I want to do Imperial Guard, and you don't like the new Cadians or the old Cadians, be prepared to spend some teeth. Be prepared to be patient. Be prepared to do some hit bashing and converting. Because, man, anything, again, even the little bit of stuff you can get that's non-Cadian is pricey and hard to find, and people will fight you for it, man. Old Imperial Guard stuff is hot. All the little places I watch, everywhere I go to buy used minis, as soon as anything like this comes in stock, it is gone immediately. It's to the point where I have friends that play Imperial Guard. Shout out to my boy Tom. We're texting each other. We're like, yo, I was in Mindtaker today, and they got some Vostroyans, or they got, Mordians, or whatever. And, we're picking them up for each other and things like that, because we know how hard it is to find this kind of stuff. So, the absolute hardest army to collect in 2023, hell, new or used, is non-Cadian Imperial Guard. That being said, I still think it's one of the coolest. Just the whole idea of you've got this universe, it's 40,000 years in the future, and you've got demons and god engines and, galaxy-devouring organisms, and a plain old Jane simple human is going to stand up to any of that, let alone be brave in the face of it. There's just something that's unceasingly cool, right? And when you put an army like that on the tabletop, when you see a whole army of one of the classic regiments, you can't help but think that it's just so cool. All right. That's been my top 5 list of the hardest to collect armies in Warhammer 40k in 2023. Let me know if you think I've missed anything, or if you've got any others, or if you're collecting any of these yourselves, any kind of hard units you've had to come across, or good places you found to get them. Now, obviously, it is 2023. It is the age of 3D printing and STL files and all that, and Victoria miniatures and whatnot, and I know there are a lot of ways to kind of print these off or get alternatives. But that's not official G-Dub, and also, more importantly, that aesthetic just isn't there. There is something classic about these that I just haven't found in any of the 3D printing stuff. And believe me, I've tried. I've got quite a bit over there in that pile. But this is still where it's at for me. So, and it's like that for a lot of other people too. Anyways, this has been Old Big Mech with a walk down memory lane. Hopefully you all enjoyed it. catch you in the next video. And until then, wow!